Wringer, Day 6, Chapter 23. Bean's mother, Palmer had to fight the temptation to call her Mrs. Beans, was a perfectly normal-looking woman whose teeth were as white as the icing on her son's 10th birthday cake. Waving her arms like a conductor, she led them in a raucous happy birthday and dished out generous gobs of ice cream. As soon as Bean tore open his presents, baseball from Palmer, pocket knife from Henry, Campbell's baked beans from Muddle, Muddle called out, "Treatment, treatment," and dragged Beans outside. The gang headed up the street to Farquhar's house. Muddle banged on the front door. "Farquhar, Farquhar." No one answered. They circled the entire house, Muddle rapping on every window and door he could reach. He threw out his arms. "Nobody's home." And then a strange thing happened. Beans, instead of being relieved that his arm was spared, said, "Let's find him," and trotted off after his own treatment. "You're crazy," said Henry, who, like any normal kid, hated the treatment. Henry always had to be prodded to face Farquhar. "Why do you want to go looking for it?" "'Cause I ain't 10 till I get the treatment," said Beans. In a sense, this was true. Among the four friends, there was the feeling that neither calendar nor cake made a birthday. Not officially. For it to be official, your arm had to feel the sting of Farquhar's knuckle. It was a dilemma. You wanted to be a year older. You did not want the treatment, and you couldn't have one without the other. At the very least, it slowed you down. For once in your life, you were not in a hurry. But Beans was in a hurry, trotting through town, checking out Farquhar's usual haunts, knocking on the doors of his friends, calling out his name. Beans seemed anxious at first, then frantic, as if not finding Farquhar would condemn him to being 9 forever. They finally found Farquhar kicking a ball on a soccer field. As Beans, then Muddle, and Henry ran, Palmer lagged behind. The day could not have been more pleasant. The sky was blue, the air warm. The crack of baseball bats could be heard in the distance. Newborn leaf clusters on the surrounding trees had a look of pale green popcorn. Tufts of onion grass sprouted across the soccer field, releasing their sweet scent. But the scent that entered Palmer's nose was the sour smell of gun smoke. The soles of his feet tingled as he walked upon the ground that halted the fall of thousands. Bean's eyes were shining, his face excited as he accepted the treatment. When Farquhar finished, he noted Bean's face registered no pain. He frowned at his famous knuckle. He bent into Bean's face for a better look. "You okay?" he said. Beans threw both arms into the air, as if one of them had not just been demolished. "I'm great," he shouted. "I'm 10. He backed off until he stood alone in the field. No bird sang in the trees, no wing flew overhead. Beans made a fist of both hands and held them out before him, end to end. The grin on his face tilted, his teeth appeared. A squishy sound came from his throat. The two closed fists snapped in opposite directions. He crowed, "And I'm a ringer." Palmer shivered. His own birthday was 3 months away. Chapter 24. Palmer came home that day to find Dorothy shooting baskets in his room. "I asked her mother if I could come in. She said so I could play basketball." Palmer sniffed. "That's a lie. You're here for Nipper." He glanced at the window. The pigeon was due home any minute. Dorothy laughed and bounced the weightless ball off Palmer's forehead. "Stop me," she growled, scooping up the ball, and suddenly she was leaping into him, over him, her knees in his chest, jamming the ball into the 4.5-foot-high basket and shrieking, "In your nose, out your toes." She laughed and bounced the ball off his nose. When he got over the shock, Palmer joined her, the two of them flinging the ball at each other and cackling like a pair of chickens. Palmer wasn't surprised to find Dorothy in his room. Since he had told her about Nipper, she had come over often. His mother, thrilled that Dorothy was back in his life, received her like a daughter. As for the Beans boys, as they sometimes called themselves, by spring they had tired of tormenting Dorothy and pretty much ignored her. Still, she did not come over when they were around, and whenever she saw Palmer with them at school, she acted as if she did not know him. Palmer sensed that she was doing this for his sake. Dorothy sat on the edge of Palmer's homework desk. "So, how was the big party, Snots?" she said with a sneer. Palmer shrugged. "Okay." "What gross stuff did you do, you and your best friends? Did you eat a dead muskrat, Snots?" "Not really, and don't call me Snots." "Why not? That's your name, Snots, isn't it? Snots." When Dorothy talked this way, Palmer could not always tell if she was serious. "It's just my gang name." I'm sorry I'm not in the gang," Dorothy said. "Look at all the great stuff I'm missing. No neat name for me, no dead muskrats, no torturing people on the way home from school, no making mothers scream, no treatment on my birthday." She rolled up her sleeve. She put on a pouty face. "Look at that, Snots, not one bruise. I want a black and blue arm. I want to have to do everything with one hand. I want some pain." Palmer's middle knuckle rose from his fist. He came at her with a wicked grin. "Okay." Dorothy screamed and hopped from the desk. They reeled about the room, she screaming, he laughing, and it wasn't until they quieted down that they heard the tapping. "Nipper!" Nipper was let in, and as usual went straight to the top of Palmer's head. This brought complaint from Dorothy. "He never stands on my head. I want him to stand on my head." "Hold still," said Palmer. He leaned in toward Dorothy until their foreheads were touching. "Go ahead, Nipper. Go to Dorothy." Nipper would not move from his perch. Dorothy stomped her foot. "Phooey!" "Wait a minute," said Palmer excitedly. He transferred Nipper to the basket rim, left the room, and returned a minute later. "Nipper has a thing about ears," he said, "especially if there's something in your ear. One day I had an earache, and I had one of these in my ear." He held up a small wad of cotton. He kept pulling it out. Dorothy took the cotton wad and pressed it into her left ear. "Yoo-hoo, Nipper," she called. "Look what's in my ear." She stood in the middle of the room with her left ear to the rim. Without delay, Nipper flew to her head, bent down, and plucked out the wad. He flew back to the rim and let the wad fall through the net. Palmer and Dorothy cheered, "Two!" Palmer scooped up the foam ball, slam dunked it, and thrust his chin at Nipper. "In your face, bird." Nipper nodded and pecked him on the nose. Dorothy cracked up. They were laughing and playing ball when Palmer, letting a flying long shot from beyond the bed, said, "Do you like my father?" Dorothy watched the ball bounce off the door. "What kind of question is that?" "Do you?" "Sure, why?" "Do you think he's nice?" "Yeah, don't you?" Palmer thought for a moment. "Yeah, he is. I guess that's the problem." Dorothy rolled her eyes. "You're talking goofy. What problem?" "The golden bird." Dorothy threw the ball at him. "Will you please make some sense?" Palmer looked across the room at Dorothy. She was back out on his homework desk. Brown hair funneled into a ponytail by a plain rubber band. Pale blue t-shirt, jeans, black and white sneakers swinging above the floor. Same old across-the-street Dorothy he had known all his life. And yet somehow not the same old Dorothy. Though she looked the same as always, Palmer had been seeing something else in her lately. Whatever it was, it registered not in his eyes, but in his feelings, and was most clearly known to him by its absence in the company of anyone but her. It made him feel floating. The previous summer, Palmer's mother had taken him to the outdoor Y pool for swimming lessons. The first lesson was floating. The instructor told him to just throw back his head, bring up his feet, and allow himself to lie on his back in the water. This made no sense to Palmer. All of his life's experiences told him that if he left his feet, he would fall, or in the case of water, sink. "Relax," the instructor kept saying. "Trust the water. It'll hold you up." But Palmer could not trust the water. For many days he could not trust it. And then, the instructor promising not to let him sink, he tried. With the instructor's hand on the small of his back, he tilted back until he felt the water on his neck, on his ears. The instructor's hand pushed gently upward. Palmer's feet left the floor of the pool. "Lie back. Relax," said the instructor. "Pretend it's your bed. Trust it." He lay back. He tried to trust. He could see nothing but the instructor's face and beyond the vast blue sky. And then the instructor's face was gone. His hand was gone and his voice was saying, "You're floating." Palmer got the same feeling with Dorothy. He knew that he could let go and she would hold him up. Tears filled his eyes. He let go. "I don't want to be a ringer. But everybody else is a ringer when they're 10. And I'm going to be 10 in 71 days. And then I'm going to have to be a ringer too. But I don't want to. So what kind of kid am I? Everybody wants to kill pigeons but me. What's the matter with me?" He said it all. He said things he had been thinking and feeling for years. He said things he didn't even know he had been thinking until he heard them come out of his mouth. He told her how he hated the golden bird, the trophy his father had won one year for shooting the most pigeons. He told her it confused him. How could one person be both a shooter of pigeons and a loving father? He apologized for joining in on the tree stumping and for calling her names. "You don't really look like a fish," he said. "Oh, thank you," she said. He apologized for not inviting her to his last birthday party. He apologized for the muskrat carcass. "My mother was shaking," she said. He told her about Bean's party and the night they came for him in his bed and led him to the railroad station and the boxes of birds. He told her about the time Nipper flew overhead and was seen by the guys and how scary it was to be the only person in town with a pigeon, and about his dreams at night. He told her that sometimes he wished he had not joined up with the guys after all, and he told her again and again that he did not. He really did not want to be a ringer. Dorothy hopped down from the desk. She walked across the room and stood before Palmer and looked straight into his eyes. "Then don't," she said. She made it sound so simple. Palmer snickered. He got up from the bed, kicked the ball around. "Yeah, don't. Easy for you to say. You're not a boy. You didn't grow up all your life scared to be 10. "I have an idea," said Dorothy brightly. Why don't you just skip 10 and go right to 11? Or tell everybody your birth certificate was wrong and you just found out you're really 21. Palmer stomped his foot, sending Nipper in a flutter from the basket rim. It's not funny. Dorothy shrugged. Well, you didn't like my serious answer. If you don't want to be a ringer, don't be a ringer. She sat on the bed. Palmer shrieked. I can't not be a ringer. Nipper flew to the bedstead. Everybody is a ringer. You have to be a ringer. That's how it always was. You don't know. You're a girl. What do you think? He sneered into her face. I can be the only boy in history of the town who is ever not a ringer? And what makes you think, he poked his finger at her, what makes you think Beans would ever let me get away with it? They would drag me out of this bed and out to the park. They would wring my neck. From her seat on the bed, Dorothy stared at the poking finger. She took hold of it and pulled it, drawing Palmer closer until his face was inches from hers. At that point, she grabbed his earlobes and pulled him closer still. She smiled broadly. She kissed the end of his nose and laughed. Palmer froze for a minute, stunned, then crumpled into laughter himself. They laughed and played games with Nipper for the rest of the afternoon. Chapter 25. For much of his life, Palmer LaRue had felt he was standing at the edge of a black bottomless hole. On the 59th day before his 10th birthday, he fell in. Daffodils clustered like bugle bands in front yards as the Beans boys left school behind on a sunny, cloudless day. It was a day in which everything seemed possible, the only problem being to make a choice. Beans wanted to head for the creek to hunt salamanders. Muddle craved a stone fight. Henry felt like baseball, and Palmer, he couldn't decide, or rather, he didn't want to decide. He simply wanted to enjoy. The bright spring day, the company of his friends, there was nothing he wanted to do. He simply wanted to be. But this was not something he could explain to himself, much less to the guys. They came to the corner of Maple and Cane and stopped. A decision had to be made which way to go. Palmer was about to throw his vote to baseball when suddenly the sunlight was briefly snipped, as if a page had been turned in front of a light bulb. This was followed and turned by a flapping sound, the feel of a pair of four-toed feet in his hair, and the deep-throated treble of a familiar voice. Palmer's mind riffled through 1,000 answers to account for all this, but only one made sense. Nipper had just landed on his head. 3 mouths gaped open, 6 eyes, round as tiny planets, stared. Suddenly Bean's face became a red, shrieking mask. Pigeon! Hands reached, wings flapped, the four-toed feet were gone from his head. Knowing at once how he must act, Palmer looked up at the fleeing bird. Hey, come here, he called, reaching up, running after it. Hey, bird, get down here! The others, too, were running, reaching, shouting. They gave chase for a full block until the gray flyer vanished over the rooftops. As they slowed to a walk, Palmer began to talk. Man, did you see that? Do you believe it? Where did that thing come from? I thought I was going to have a heart attack. You sure it was a pigeon? What would a pigeon be doing around here? Maybe it was a crow. He kind of looked like a crow to me. It was a pigeon, said Beans. His voice was not friendly. Palmer did not return Beans' stare. Really? He pretended to scan the skies. If that thing ever comes near me again, he made a chopping motion. I'll whack it. He bent down and showed the top of his head to the others. He ruffled his hair. Did it poop on my head? No one answered. He straightened up. He dared not look at them. They walked in silence. He felt their eyes. His heart was thumping. The bird is yours, Bean's voice from behind. Palmer turned. They had stopped 10 steps ago. It felt like 10 miles. Palmer spread his arms. He crouched as if to leap from a high place. What? Muddle pointed. It's yours, ain't it? That's why it landed on your head. And that one we saw fly over us that time on your street, said Beans. Yeah, croaked Muddle. Palmer laughed. You're crazy. Why would I have a pigeon? I hate pigeons. I'm going to be a ringer. I'm going to wring their necks. I'm going to whack them. An empty soda can was lying in the gutter. He stomped on it with all his might, stomped again and again, crushed it, flattened it. He picked it up and dashed it to the sidewalk and stomped on it some more. Whack 'em, whack 'em. I hate pigeons. I hate 'em all. He looked up at the staring, glaring eyes. He clenched his fists. He screamed, I'm going to be the best ringer there ever was. Chapter 26. An hour later, in his room with Dorothy, Palmer was still jumpy. He paced back and forth, telling Dorothy what had happened. The more agitated he became, the faster he paced. Nipper observed from a booktop, swinging his head as if watching a ping-pong match. The bird had been waiting at the window as usual when Palmer returned home. Sit down, said Dorothy, who sat on the homework desk. "You're making me nervous." "I can't help it," said Palmer. "I almost got killed out there." "Palmer, they kill pigeons in this town, not people." "That's what you think. You didn't see the way they were looking at me. And don't say," he formed the words, "kill pigeons" with his lips around him. He nodded toward Nipper, who had stopped and cocked his head as if listening. "Sorry," said Dorothy. "So what are you going to do?" Palmer threw out his arms. "I don't know." He spoke to Nipper. "You dumb, stupid bird brain. Why did you do that? What am I going to do?" When he had come home and found Nipper at the window as usual, he was both happy and not happy. He half wished Nipper hadn't showed up, so he could be rid of the whole problem. For a moment he considered pulling down the shade, then hated himself for even thinking that, threw open the window. He took 2 fistfuls of his own hair, squatted on the floor, and screamed up at the pigeon. "What am I going to do?" Nipper's answer was a gargling noise. "Teach him to shoot foul shots. Get it? Foul? F-O-W-L?" Dorothy tittered at her own joke. Palmer wasn't amused. Dorothy had Palmer's magic marker in one hand, the Nerf ball in the other. She tossed him the ball. In large black letters on the spongy surface, she had written the words, "Nipper's ball." "Big help you are," said Palmer. Palmer's nervousness lasted until he went to sleep that night, and resumed when the alarm clock woke him up next morning with the customary nip on the earlobe. He did not feed Nipper on the roof as usual. Instead, he spread newspaper on his floor and poured the honey crunchers there, plus some leftover peas from dinner the night before. Nipper loved peas. Then Palmer quickly opened the window and shooed his pigeon into the sky. Now, what should he wear? He was afraid that if he wore his usual clothes, Nipper might again recognize him and drop him in on him after school. He needed a disguise. He looked around. He found the long-sleeved white shirt that he had once worn to Cousin Linda's wedding, and the dark brown trousers that went with it. He checked himself in the mirror. He still looked too much like Palmer and LaRue. He went down to the basement, to the closet where his mother had stored everyone's winter clothes. He got out his thick, quilted, thigh-length coat, the one his father said could keep him warm at the North Pole. He also grabbed his green woolen stocking hat with a pom-pom and, why not, his father's black and white checkered scarf. He stuffed hat and scarf in his pockets and was sneaking out the door when his mother screeched, "Halt!" She approached him, squinting as if not believing her eyes. "What's this?" she said, fingering the quilted coat. "A coat. I can see that. It's May. It's warm out. I heard it's going to get colder later on." "Not that cold." "Okay, look. I'll unzipper it." He unzippered the coat. "I gotta go, Mom. I'm going to be late." He bolted down the steps and up the sidewalk, hoping his mother would not call him back. She did not. In the classroom, Palmer kept looking at the clock. For once, he wanted school to last forever. He did not want to walk home. He dreaded the closing bell. When it came, he marched up to the teacher and told her he thought she should keep him after school. She looked at him funny. "And why is that, Palmer?" "Because I was bad." She looked surprised. Palmer was never bad. "I was not aware of that. You just didn't catch me." "Is that so? And now you wish to confess?" "Yes." "You want to clear your conscience?" "Yes." "I see." She was smiling. She settled back in her chair. "So, what bad thing did you do?" "I spit on the floor." Her eyebrows went up. "Really? Right here? In this room?" "Yes." "When did you do this?" After lunch." She stood. "Would you mind showing me where you did it?" Palmer had not anticipated this. He had not thought a confession required proof. "I wiped it up," he said. She nodded, still smiling. "Ah, well, that was good of you. I think that settles it. You may go on home now." Palmer stood there, hanging from her eyes. He could not bring himself to go outside. He took a step back, turned to the side, and spit on the floor. "Look," he said, "I did it again." The teacher gasped. She was no longer smiling. He was ordered to fetch a paper towel and clean it up. He was sent to the blackboard to write 100 times, "I will never, 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 ever again spit on the floor." 5 of the nevers, plus the ever, were his own idea. He wrote as slowly as he could. The teacher was in and out of the room as he wrote. At one point, the guy showed up at the door. "What are you doing?" Beans asked. "Being punished," said Palmer. Beans leaned in to look at the blackboard. "You spit on the floor?" "Yep." The guys were goggle-eyed. "Was it a big one?" said Mutto. "A lunger," said Palmer. The guys were swooning. They were really impressed. It took me 5 minutes to clean it up. At that moment, he could have been elected president of the gang. The teacher returned and the guys took off. From then on, whenever the teacher left the room or simply wasn't looking, Palmer erased what he had just written. When she finally packed up to go home, she came to the blackboard and counted the sentences. 9? She exclaimed. Palmer, you write like a snail. I'll go faster, he said. No, you may stop now. Punishment's over. Palmer clutched the chalk. I don't think I should stop till I get to 100. I can feel the sentences working, I think. I need the whole punishment to make me stop spitting. The teacher took a step back. The look on her face said, Is he going to fire one at me? Then her expression changed, hardened. Palmer, she said firmly, I am confident you will never spit in this room again. Now put down the chalk and go home. He put down the chalk, he got his coat, and put it on. He zippered it up. The teacher's jaw dropped. Her eyes widened as he pulled the green woolen cap over his ears, as he wrapped the checkered scarf around his neck and pulled it up to just below his eyes. She was about to say something. My mother's afraid I'll catch the flu, he blurted, and ran from the room before she could stop him. When he got outside, his heart sank. The guys were still there. They had ignored his heavy coat on the way to school, but now, seeing the added scarf and hat, they cracked up. Hey, Snots, where's the blizzard? You look like Frosty the Snow Nerd. My mom made me, he told them, trying to sound resentful. She says I'm getting the flu. He tried to steer them to another subject. What are you doing here, anyway? Beans sidled alongside, draped his arm around Palmer's shoulders. We are your buddies, Snots. You get punished, we wait. His smile was as flat as a cartoon. Palmer, Henry was the only one who occasionally called him by his right name. Be honest, did you really spit on the floor? Palmer looked at them in the eye. Yeah? I said, didn't I? They weren't sure whether to believe him, but they wanted to. Palmer could tell, and suddenly he realized he had stumbled onto a way to divert attention from Nipper. He marched back to the school door, pulled it open dramatically, and pointed inside. He yanked out the scarf and growled, Go ask Miss Kiner. They believed. He could see it in their faces. They mobbed him, slapping fives, cheering his name. On the way home, they pestered him again and again to tell the story, especially the look on the teacher's face. They laughed and thumped his back. They said they didn't think he'd ever do such a thing. They no longer seemed to care or even notice that he was muffled up like a mummy. But they did scan the skies. In the midst of the laughing and thumping, Palmer caught their eyes drifting upward, and Mutto had something new with him this day, a slingshot. Palmer pulled the scarf higher and prayed that Nipper was already home.